The November 27th, 2018 meeting of the Transportation Committee will now come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Hebert.
Here.
Chairman Holland.
Here.
Mr. Lightfoot.
Here.
Mr. Morelli is excused. Mr. Rockow.
Here.
Mr. Shepard.
Here.
Mr. Zale.
Here.
Is there anyone signed up for the public forum?
There is not.
Is there anyone present who is not signed up to speak who would like to address the committee at this time? Seeing none, I would like to introduce Robert Franklin, Chief Financial Officer of Monroe County, who is here to present the 2019 proposed Monroe County budget as it pertains to the Transportation Committee. We will have questions and answer period following the presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have any Cheerios.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to beat my record of the prior committees for fastest presentation. We have 3 slides to present, this being slide number 1. The Department of Transportation in the 2019 budget, proposed budget. We can see that appropriations are about $4.2 million higher than what we see in 2018. I'm going to tell you that it is entirely related to capital projects. For the 2019 proposed budget, we are proposing to you that 2 capital projects, traffic engineering and spot improvements, be funded with cash capital transfers from the operating budget rather than bond finance. We've talked a bit about cash capital last night. Both of these particular projects are annually recurring of consistent dollar amounts. Therefore, it makes better financial sense to be funding these projects with cash transferred from the operating budget rather than bond finance and then have to pay back the associated interest costs. The DOT's proposed budget also includes $1.7 million of additional debt service payments funded by appropriated fund balance from the debt service fund. This would be repayments of short-term notes issued during 2018 that have a maturity date in June of 2019. I believe all of you are aware that RGRTA and their bus company is partially funded by Monroe County. While it is a state authority, New York, of course, requires the local municipality to match a portion of the state funding provided. So in Monroe County, we are tasked with about a $3.5 million required appropriation for our bus company. And Mr. Chairman, boom, there it is. Be happy to answer questions at the table.
The floor is open for questions. Mr. Hebert?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, could the legislature please be updated on the status of the reflective backplate safety project and how many traffic lights have been updated?
That's better. Through you, Mr. Chairman, our backplate program has just begun. We went out to bid for the materials, and we are intending to procure them and begin installations in 2019. So to date, none of the backplates have been installed.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, why is there an increase on page 333 of almost $770,000 under contractual services?
Yeah, if you'd like, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, within the Department of Transportation, it's pretty common that this body will see relatively large swings in cost between the contractual services line and the supplies and materials line from year to year. For the 2019 proposed budget, you see the shift from supplies to contractual services. An increase, as noted, about roughly $770,000. There's a variety of components, Mr. Chairman. The largest component of that is an increase in highway engineering, New York's CHIPS program. You may recall in prior years, we would budget most of the CHIPS funding, and a referral would be presented to the legislature to accept specific CHIPS funding. We are actually anticipating in this proposed budget what that CHIPS amount will be. So $633,000 is a large portion of that increase. Basically, in addition to that, I would suggest a $112,000 increase is associated with a biannual pavement road study. So, of course, that's just every other year budget item that we have to contemplate. There's a couple other ins and outs, Mr. Chairman, but those are the highlights.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Related to this question, you said that the supplies and materials would also change, and it did go down just over $900,000. Can you detail that a little bit, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. The largest portion of that decrease, about $867,000 worth, relates to a decrease in highway engineering construction supplies, that specifically being shifted to commercial services. And I'm also being reminded, Mr. Chairman, that is also related to the CHIPS program. And
On the same, through you, Mr. Chairman, on the same page, 333, there's an increase of about $3 million under debt service during your presentation. I think I heard you talk about 1.7 of that. What's the other 1.3?
Mr. Chairman, there is always changes in the debt service schedule for every department. I believe last night I commented, when most folks think of debt service, they think of their home mortgage payment, where it's the same dollar amount every single month. It's not actually how we structure debt in Monroe County. We follow what's called the 50% rule. But all these capital projects have to be follow repayment schedules according to local finance law, which means they have maturity schedules with different terms, 5 years, 10 years, 15. So you will always see relatively significant changes from year to year in debt service. And this particular change is simply it could be new projects that came on board, plus the short-term notes that will be repaid in full.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, why is there an increase of almost $1.4 million under traffic operations and permits?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to refer this group to page 337 of the budget book. That is the page that more fully describes the division of traffic operations and permits, and you can see quite a number of changes within there. This is where you see, Mr. Chairman, $1.175 million associated with the cash capital funding of those two projects I mentioned in my presentation. So that explains a significant increase from the 2018 amended budget. There are also increases in debt service, a little more than $200,000 in this particular division. Other numbers change here and there, but those are the largest impact.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, why is there an increase of $2.2 million under highway engineering and operations?
Mr. Chairman, to answer that particular question, I'm inclined to refer you to page 339. Page 339 more fully describes the Highway Engineering and Operations Division. Again, as noted, better than a $2 million increase. A lot of those has to do with the redistribution of the CHIPS funding between contractual services and construction supplies. You will see I'll also draw your attention to the debt service line. 2018 amended budget was $8.9 million and change versus $11.1 million and change. So that increase is associated with the debt in the notes is very well represented in this particular division.
Thank you.
Mr. Zale, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a little bit more of a philosophical question as a former financial advisor here pertaining to debt service, bonding, and, for lack of a better word, paying in cash. Mr. Chairman, the administration during the presentation had mentioned why we might purchase things as opposed to bonding them and accruing interest. And so my philosophical question is, at what rate do we receive interest through reserve funds? Through the chair.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to ask to clarify that question. Is the question asking what approximately interest does Monroe County earn while money sits in our reserve bank account?
Correct. Maybe I'll get to the actual question.
I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, 1.6%.
So through the chair, not very much.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair to the administration, what's the percentage that we pay to bond or to increase our debt? What's the interest rate that we pay for our debt?
Mr. Chairman, that's variable depending on the maturity year. We most often issue our bonds on the competitive market, meaning we don't pick the interest rates. We only pick the maturity schedule, and it's up to the individual investor, J.P. Morgan Chase Securities, Citigroup, Wells Fargo. It's up to them to bid on each maturity and the interest they will pay. I will tell you, in the most recent bond issuance, June of 2018, this was the first year every maturity came with a 5% coupon.
So, Mr. Chairman, through you to the administration, it's very safe to say that it is much more costly to have these issuances of bonds than it would be to try to find a way to grow our money through interest rates. Through the chair.
Absolutely correct, Mr. Chairman. These are all, these two projects specifically, I believe, are 5-year PPU, probability of usefulness.
And
so that short repayment time, we're better off with the cash than bonding.
And last question on this particular topic, Mr. Chairman. Are we limited in the nature of the structures that we are allowed to place our money for the purposes of gaining interest? Through the chair.
Mr. Chairman, I have to ask again to clarify, is the question, are we limited in the types of investments we can place our idle cash?
Through the chair, that is my question.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We are limited by not only the county's investment policy, but that investment policy is modeled after state law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It sounds to me like we are making every attempt to get the most amount for our money, whether we are bonding or paying straight up, and I appreciate that personally. I'd like to move to something specific under traffic operations and permits on page 337. I'm just curious what capital projects are included in this division.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the efforts that are taken under the capital projects in traffic engineering are spot improvements, which are intersection safety, adding some turn lanes, and the other is our traffic engineering, which is upgrading of older signal systems and upgrades of crosswalks and pedestrian signals, and that as they have aged out and need to be replaced.
Thank you.
Mr. Rocco?
Through the chair to the administration, under Highway Engineering and Operations, on page 566, line 505025, there's a decrease of $870,000 under construction supplies. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Mr. Chairman, page 566, is that the correct page? This is our traffic operations and permits.
Correct. Line 505025, decrease in $870,000 under construction supplies?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. My error. That reduction really is related to the CHIPS program and directly related to that typical year-to-year shift from supplies and materials to the contractual services appropriation line.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Lightfoot?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You want to smile there, buddy? That's all right.
It's a happy day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you to the administration, can you please share with us what two projects that we're purchasing with cash capital that's raising the appropriations? What two projects are we getting? Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the administration.
The two capital funds?
You may have already said it, but I didn't hear it though.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, the two accounts that are being funded with the cash capital, the spot improvements, which typically go for shoulder improvements and turn lane improvements, which we identify in our maintenance programs on an annual basis. We just completed driving majority of our roads, and I've identified a couple of our narrower roads where we're going to be building some shoulders where we don't have any now. Under the traffic engineering, that's typically applied to signal systems that are targeted for upgrades. I don't have the exact signal system that's going to be applied to that money, but it may be several that are upgraded with new heads or arms or pole bases for that matter.
All right, no worries. Thank you so much. I do have a few questions, Mr. Chairman, to the administration. Is the lane miles, are the lane miles cleared of, well, on page 340, page 340 tells us the line item that says clear snow and salted. I think the number is 1,488. Do we use this number to calculate the chargeback tax on county tax bills, or what do we use that number for? Under performance measures.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's the number of lane miles that are cleared of plowed and salted. The towns are paid on a lane mile basis. So our payment is based on the number of lane miles that they actually do for us. That's measured, calculated, and itemized for each town under their agreement for snow and ice services.
So the towns do them for us. Did I hear that correctly through the chair? Did I hear that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
So the towns do them for us, and so we pay them, I would think, right? Or there's a reduction on some kind of bill. Do we pay them, or what? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, we have an agreement with each and every town. We pay a calculated price per lane mile, times the number of lane miles. They get 90% of their payment in February, and the remaining 10% at the end of the snow season when they provide us with their actual cost data.
Okay, great, thank you. On page 566, spending in traffic operations includes 1.175 million of cash capital. I think you already explained this. What would it be spent on? I think the question's already been answered. I was wondering about capital cash. Thank you. Has it been answered already, or no?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that would be the spot improvements and the traffic engineering.
Thank you. On page 703, our charges to other governments are charged back?
Yeah.
Or, can you explain what it is, please? And I have a follow-up question on that same thing, on 704.
Mr. Chairman, charges to other governments primarily are chargebacks.
So are these chargebacks, how does these chargebacks work? Does it show up on the tax bill, or how does this work? Charges to other governments.
Charges to
Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, the charges to other governments, that's pavement marking services in the city of Rochester, as well as sign fabrication and installation services in the city. And we also do that for the towns as well on their request. Fulfill their orders, do the installations, and invoice them.
And then we invoice them, then they pay us.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
So, through you, Mr. Chairman, we believe that this is the money that we're going to take in as revenue?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. I have no further questions.
Okay. Are there any further questions from anyone else? There being none, I want to make a comment about Mike Zale, what Legislator Zale was talking about in the investment of money, using it for paying bills for cash or for bonding. With my experience with the town of Henrietta, when I got there, they were buying a plow truck a year and bonding it each year, and I was able to get them to pay cash each year for that plow truck, so we didn't have the interest expense, and yes, you do save a lot of money. So, we shall go on. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. You have the October 23rd, 2018 minutes of the Transportation Committee before you. They will stand approved unless the clerk is notified of any changes by the end of the day. We'll proceed to new business. The next item on the agenda is new business. Mr. Clerk?
Referral 18-0343.
Moved by Legislator Hebert, seconded by Legislator Zale. Are there any questions, comments? There being none, proceed to vote. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The referral passes. Are there any other matters to come before the committee? Seeing none, there be no other matters. The November 27th, 2018 meeting of the Transportation Committee stands adjourned. The next meeting of the Transportation Committee is scheduled for Tuesday, December 18th, 2018 at 5:15 p.m.